source. The first moment, it is the highest point that can be conceptualized, yet it cannot be understood by rational minds. It is the single point upon which all variations and aspects of reality converge, the crown of the tree of life, and final home to Bastion, where the followers of the Source seek to keep Lilith's followers at bay. Gogiel. The realm of Gogiel was once Chakma, the male aspect of Kether, known as the Father, and the realm of wisdom. It represented the overflowing of divine energy, the end-shaped forces of creation. Chakma could be seen as the point of origin of all dynamics and the beginning of perception. As Gogiel, however, it is turned into a realm that is antagonistic to creative potential and motion. Its nature is defined by its tendency to block, to inhibit, and represents the death of the first seed of creation. Satoria. Formerly known as Binah, the mother to Chakma's father. There the divine energies were shaped and balanced, given structure and form. Its opposite is Satoria, which represents the death of creative energy in pursuit of endless, lifeless structure. It is a realm where shapes and forms cloud the true nature of reality, where the essence of things are lost, and perception is twisted. Belial. Belial, also known as Belial, was once Dath, the sphere of knowledge. It stemmed from the union of Chakma and Binah, and is why knowledge is called the son of wisdom and intelligence. There is much to Dath that provoked scholars who debated its place in the Tree of Life, but it is said to have been the secret entrance and exit point from the first triad, Kether, Chakma, and Binah, to the next three spheres in the Tree of Life. Similarly, its Qliphothic version, Belial, is the gateway through which Lilith's forces assaulted the first triad, the secret path that allowed them to slip past defenses. If Dath is knowledge, Belial is the blockage of such, making the pursuit of knowledge an end in and of itself. When the desire to learn becomes lust for information, when greed for knowledge overcomes all, one loses the ability to continue one's spiritual journey, becomes trapped in the ivory tower of secret information. That knowledge is sterile, and Belial takes the value of knowledge, which should be a portal from one state of being to another, and turns it into a dead end. Golohab. Golohab is the Qliphothic aspect of Geburah, where the universal forces of giving shape and form compressed to become the severity of a court of justice. As Geburah's opposite, Golohab exhibits the mindless and merciless violence which judges according to biased standards, its wrath and fury against life. A realm of judgment and merciless violence, a realm of anger and fire. Ga'ag Shibla. Ga'ag Shibla is where the divine force that animates the world is spread too thin, and represents misguided and unbalanced love, which suffocates and ultimately kills the target of its affections. It was once Kesset, which reflected the divine love of the Source, its mercy and kindness. Ga'ag Shibla is the opposite of that, a land where love strangles and leads to cruelty and abuse. Taganron. Taganron is the Qliphothic aspect of Tifereth, that seeks in every way to conceal instead of unveiling beauty. Its essence is the opposite of Tifereth, wherein beauty is not a catch-all term meant to express a cultural expression of physical aesthetics. Instead, in Tifereth, beauty is manifested the integration of compassion and strength, without which the divine power of the Source from Kether could not flow to the rest of creation. Compassion and discipline, intellect and emotion. It is in that perfect balance that true beauty can be found, where universal harmony can be achieved. The Qliphoth of Tifereth is where these forces are unbalanced, where man is prevented from experiencing this state of union, communion, and beauty. Enemies will take any shape and manifest in any force that creates confusion rather than fusion of heart and mind. Samael. Samael is the dark mirror of Hod, which holds the principle of fluctuation and reflects the fluidity and flexibility of our thinking mind. Samael thus is about blinding those who consider it, making them unauthentic, creating a world of illusions and lies. Garab. Garab is the opposite of Kesed, the sphere of victory and triumph over opposing forces. Creation has given birth to the fundamental forces of attraction and rejection, which can now unfold harmonically. Its Qliphothic state is thus of opposing forces, without the influence of wisdom and mildness, where creation produces life carelessly, destroying it as soon as nurturing it. Gamaliel. Gamaliel, which reflects Yesod, the sphere whose analogy and its place on the tree of life are the human genitals, a correlation which expresses the act of creation, where fundamental forces are birthed. Its Qliphothic aspect is distorted or destructive fertility, a sexual urge that is never satisfied, but always demanding newer and stronger stimulation, consuming vitality and creativity without offering anything in return. Malkuth. Malkuth is the 10th Qliphothic sphere, and the only point outside of or below the three triads. It cannot thus be described as a single reflection of any of the corrupted others, but rather a reflection of all 9, as the concentration and materialization of all preceding emanations of the demonic to a single point. The shape and influence of Malkuth is thus one and many at the same time. Herein dwells Lilith, biding her time till Kether falls, upon which time she shall at last emerge and claim Kether as Thaumiel for herself.
This has been an Audible Studios production of The Ravens of Death, Sun Sun Sim Sum, Book 4. Written by Mike Truck. Performed by Leo Barnabas. Executive producers Jeff Golick and Mike Charzuk. Producer Chelsea Pita. Copyright 2020 by Mike Truck. Sound recording copyright 2020 by Audible Inc. Audible Studios is a division of Audible Inc.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program. This is Audible.
Audible Studios presents Dreams Die First, written by Harold Robbins, narrated by Derek Shetterly. The downside. Chapter 1. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon when I woke up. The room stank of stale cigarettes and cheap sour red wine. I rolled out of bed and almost fell as I stumbled over the boy sleeping on the floor beside my bed. I stared down at him in surprise. He was naked, and I couldn't remember how or when he got there. Even worse, I didn't recognize him. He didn't move as I walked across the room, rolled up the shade, and opened the window. The song says it never rains in Southern California. Don't you believe it? The way the wind blasted the water over me, it was like stepping under a cold shower. I swore and pushed the window down. Some of the rain hit the boy, but it didn't wake him. He merely rolled over on his side and curled into a ball, his knees tucked up against his chest. I circled around him to go into the bathroom. I still had half an hour to get over to unemployment and collect my check. If I rushed, I could make it. 10 minutes later, I was on my way out the front door. The collector, whose new red 68 Jaguar blocked the rush hour traffic coming from the freeway on 2 Highland, was sitting and waiting for me. He raised his hand and I rushed across the rain-swept sidewalk and got into the car. I haven't got my money yet, I said before he could speak. I was just on my way to unemployment. His shiny black face creased in an easy smile. That's okay, Gareth. I figured that. I'll drive you. He moved into traffic, disdainful of the blasting horns behind him. Business must be bad if Lonergan is sending you after the small fry. He was still smiling. Lonergan believes that if you look after the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. I had no answer for that. I'd been into Lonergan for so long I'd almost forgotten when it all began. 3, maybe 4 months ago, when I ran short after my first unemployment check. I'd never gotten caught up after that. It was like taking an instant $10 cut. Every week, I gave him my unemployment check for $60, and he gave me back $50 in cash. If I could have made it 1 week without the $50, I would have been even. But no way. Without it was wipeout time. The collector turned into the parking lot and pulled up in front of the entrance. I'll be right here, he said. Go get it. I jumped out of the car and dashed for the door. I made it just as the guard came to lock up. Verita, the Mexican girl, was at my regular window. For Christ's sake, Gary, she complained. Why you come so late? What do you think? I was out looking for a job. Oh, yeah? She pulled the forms out of the drawer and pushed them toward me. It was raining and you stayed in bed for one more fuck waiting for it to stop. Only when you're with me, baby, I said, signing the form. Ain't no other lady can keep me coming back like that. She smiled as she gave me the check. I bet you say that to all the girls. I folded the check and stuck it in my pocket. Not true, you asked them. I make dinner home tonight, she said. Good enchiladas, tacos with real beef, red wine. You come? I can't, Verita, honest. I got a meeting with a guy about a job. She made a face. Whenever a man say honest to me, I know he's lying. Maybe next week, I said, starting for the door. There won't be no next week, she called after me. But I was already at the door, and it wasn't until I was back in the car that I found out what she meant. The collector had the pen ready for me. I took it, signed the check, and handed it over to him. He looked at my signature and shoved the check in his pocket. Good, he nodded. Then his voice went flat. Now get out. I stared in surprise. But you didn't give me my $50. No more, he said. Your credit just ran out. What are you talking about? We got this standing arrangement. Only as long as you get your checks. You don't stay on top of things the way Lonergan does. He knows this is your last check and that you're not eligible now for another 3 months. Shit. What do I do now? I'm busted. You could go back to work, he said, instead of trying to pick up shit clap from small boys. There was nothing for me to say. It seemed Lonergan knew it all. The collector reached across me and pushed open the door. I started to get out, and the collector put a hand on my arm. Lonergan told me if you really want to go back to work, to come and see him tonight about 12:30 in his office in back of the dome. Then he pulled the door shut and drove off, leaving me standing with the rain pouring down my face. I fished through my pockets and came up with a mangled package of cigarettes. There were maybe 3 left. I went back against the building out of the wind and lit one. When I looked up, I saw Verita driving out of the lot in her old Valiant. I waved. She stopped, and I ran over and got in. My appointment isn't until 12:30 if your offer is still good, I said. She had a small studio apartment just off Olivera Street. If you angled yourself at the window, you could see the bright lights down the street, which was always busy. The Chicanos didn't seem to mind the rain. After dinner was walk-around time. That was when they went and stayed out, dragging their kids with them until everything closed up at 2 in the morning. Then the poor ones took the kids home, and those that could afford it made for the after-hours places. Mexicans didn't like to sleep at night. "Here's Johnny!" Ed McMahon's voice came from the television set at the foot of the bed behind me. I raised my head. Her hands pushed me down between her legs again. "Don't stop, Gary. That's so good." I looked up at her. Her face held the grim concentration that came over it as she reached for an orgasm. I put 3 fingers into her and rolled her button gently between my teeth. I felt her body arch and spasm as she hit it. Her breath rushed out with an explosive gasp. I could feel the still trembling buttocks in my hand. I waited a moment until she stopped and opened her eyes. She shook her head slowly. "You do it so good, Gary. Nobody do it like you." Her fingers came down and tangled with my hair, brushing it back from my eyes. "I love to see your blonde head down there between my legs. My hair is so dark, and yours is so white." I rolled over and began to get out of bed. She stopped me. "Do you have to go? It's still raining. You can stay with me tonight." I wasn't lying. I have an appointment about a job. "Who gives job interviews at 12:30 at night?" she asked skeptically. I reached for my jeans. Lonergan. "Oh." She rolled out of bed and made for the bathroom. "I go wash my pussy. I'll be right back. I drive you over." We were silent in the car until she pulled to a stop in front of Lonergan's place behind the Cinerama Dome. "Do you want me to wait for you?" "No. I don't know how long I'll be." She hesitated a moment. "He's not a good man, Gary. Be careful." I looked at her questioningly. "He waits for people who have no money, then he sucks them in. I know boys and girls who are working the streets for him. Sometimes he has the collector wait for them outside the office on the day they get their last check, like he waited for you." I was surprised. I didn't think she had seen him. I don't intend to walk the streets for anybody. Her eyes were shining. "Do you have money?" "I'll manage." She opened her purse and took out a $10 bill. She pressed it into my hand. "Take it," she said earnestly. "Nobody should see Lonergan without money in his pocket." I hesitated. "It's a loan," she said quickly. "You pay me back when you get a job." I looked down at the 10, then nodded and put it in my pocket. "Thanks." I leaned across the seat and kissed her. The rain had eased off. I waited until she put the car in gear and drove away before making my way into the Silver Stud bar. The bar was almost empty except for a few hustlers nursing their drinks. They looked me over quickly and just as quickly wrote me off. It was still too early for the rich queens to come down from the hills. I walked down the bar. I nodded. He pointed to a chair. "Sit down and have a drink." I looked at him with raised eyebrows. His face broke into a smile. His teeth were sparkling white in the dark. What's your pleasure?" "Scotch rocks." I slipped into the chair. The waiter put the drink in front of me. I took a mouthful and savored the taste. It felt crisp and clean. "You look beat, man," the collector said. "Like you've been eating a little too much Mexican chili tonight." "How come you know so much about what I do? I must be real important." The collector laughed. "You're not important. Lonergan is, and he likes to be informed about people he plans to do business with." Chapter 2. Lonergan came in about 1 o'clock. He walked right past the table at which we were sitting without even a glance in our direction and went up the stairs, followed by his bodyguard. I started to get out of my chair. The collector waved me back. "When he wants to see you, he'll send for you." He went by so fast he never even saw me. "He saw you. He sees everything." He signaled for another drink. glass and looked down the bar. It was beginning to get busy. The Beverly Hills and Bel Air queens were coming in after their society dinner dates. They had the air of those who, having done their duty, were now seeking a little fun. One of them, who saw me looking, must have thought I was casing him. He took a few steps toward me, then saw the collector and went back to the bar. The collector gave a short laugh. "You pretty. With that white blonde hair, you can make a good buck playing cowboy." "Is that the kind of job Lonergan wants to talk to me about?" I asked. "How the fuck do I know, man? He don't take me into his confidence." Half an hour later, the bodyguard signaled me from the foot of the stairs. I left my drink on the table and followed him up the steps. He opened the door of the office, closed it behind me, and remained out in the hall. The soundproofing and the faint hum of the air conditioner units cut out all the noise from the bar. The room was starkly furnished and dominated by a large desk. A shaded round fluorescent lamp illuminated the papers on the desk blotter. Lonergan was behind the desk, his face half hidden in the shadows. He looked up. "Hello, Gareth." His voice was as non-committal as his tie, white shirt, and Brooks Brothers 3-button jacket. "Hello, Uncle John." I made no move to the chair in front of the desk. "Sit down," he said. Silently, I sat down in the stiff-backed chair. "Your mother hasn't heard from you in more than 2 months." I didn't answer. There was no reproval in his voice. "She's worried about you." "I thought you kept her informed." "I don't," he said flatly. "You know my rules. I never involve myself in family affairs. She's my sister, you're her son. If you have problems in communication, you solve them." "Then why bring it up?" "She asked me to." I started to get up. He raised his hand. "We're not finished. I said I had a proposition for you." The collector said it was a job. He shook his head. "People are stupid. They never get messages straight." "Okay," he said. His eyes glinted behind the small, old-fashioned gold-rimmed glasses. "You're getting kind of on in years for the role you're playing. Somehow, 30-year-old hippies seem out of date." I didn't answer. Kerouac, Ginsberg, Leary, they're all rapidly disappearing into yesterday. Even the kids aren't listening anymore. I fished the last cigarette from my pocket and lit it. I didn't know what he was getting at. "Where have all your heroes gone?" "I never had any heroes, except you, maybe. And that went out the window when my father jumped." His voice was empty. "Your father was a weak man." "My father couldn't face the thought of going to jail for you. He chose the quick way. He could have done 4 to 6 on one hand. When he got out, he would have been in clover." "If it was so easy, why didn't you do it?" A shadowed smile crossed his lips. "Because I have a business to run. Your father knew that when we made our deal." I dragged on the cigarette without speaking. He picked up a sheet of paper from his desk. "Do you know even the FBI gave up on you? They didn't think you were worth keeping an eye on." I smiled. "That's not very flattering, is it?" "Would you like to know why?" He didn't wait for me to answer. "You were too intellectual. They said you'd never make a good revolutionary. You always saw both sides of a problem and found reasons for each of them." "Is that why they went to the trouble of fucking up the jobs I got?" "That was before they had you figured. Now they don't give a damn." "That doesn't help me now. The damage is done. Every prospective employer has it in his record." "That's why I sent for you." He paused for a moment. "Maybe it's time you went into business for yourself." "Doing what? You going to buy me a taxi, Uncle John?" "How about a weekly newspaper of your own?" My mouth hung open. "You're putting me on." "No." His voice was flat. "There's got to be a hooker in this somewhere." "Just one. I own the advertising. You can do what you like with the rest of the paper. Use it to say whatever you want to say. I don't give a damn." "Advertising is where the money is. Where do I get mine?" "Circulation. You keep the net receipts and I'll throw in 10% of the advertising revenue to help with the costs." "Who will own the paper?" "You will." "Where does the money to start it come from?" "It's already started," he answered. "You may have seen copies of it around, the Hollywood Express." I ground out the cigarette. For a moment I had felt elation, but now it was gone. The Hollywood Express was a throwaway sheet. Every once in a while I would find a copy stuffed in my mailbox. He knew what I was thinking. "What did you expect, the LA Times?" "The Express is not a newspaper. That's a point of view, he said. To me, 8 pages of newsprint is a newspaper. I fished for another cigarette, but came up empty. He pushed a box across the desk. I took one and lit it. Your unemployment's run out. There's not a paper or magazine that would touch you and you know it. You're not a good enough writer to make it freelance in the magazines, and your novel has been turned down by every publisher, including the vanity press houses. Why me, Uncle John? I asked. You've got to have better than me on your list. His eyes met mine. Put it down to vanity. He permitted himself a faint smile. You got something going inside you. Maybe it's the way you look at yourself or society. You're skeptical about everything, and still you believe in people. It doesn't make sense. Not to me, anyhow. Abruptly, he changed the subject. How long has it been since you got out of the Army? 5 years. They kept me in for a year after I got back from Vietnam. I guess they didn't like the idea of a Green Beret getting out and spouting off against the war. You could get a GI loan to take over the paper, he said. You really are serious about it, aren't you? The amazement showed in my voice. I always am about business, he said flatly. And what's in it for you? He took off his glasses, polished them, and put them back on his nose. His eyes were hard and bright. 4 pages of classified ads at $1,000 a page. That's $4,000 a week. Impossible. That rag couldn't sell 10 lines a month. That's my problem. For your 10% of the ads, all you have to do is write them. You mean make them up just like that? He nodded. Who pays for them? He shrugged his shoulders. The money comes to you in cash, $1 a line, $4 to $10 an ad. You just process it and skim your 10%. Now it all began to fall into place. My uncle had to do a big cash business. This was as good a way to wash the money as any I'd ever heard. The going rate on the street for turning black money into white was 40 to 50%. He had it figured for only 10%. I'll have to think about it, I said. You do that. Tomorrow morning, Bill will pick you up at your place and take you over to the paper so you can look over the setup. Bill? The collector. Oh. Until now, I had never known he had a name. I got to my feet. You meet me here tomorrow night at the same time and give me your answer. Okay. I started for the door. By the way, that boy up at your place, if you fucked him, you better get yourself a shot of penicillin. He took a 20 from his pocket and threw it on the desk. In case you haven't got the money, there's enough there for you and the Mexican girl you had dinner with. I looked down at the money and then up at him. I have enough, I said, and closed the door behind me. I went down the stairs and through the bar to the street. Now I was sorry I hadn't had Farida wait for me. Slowly I started walking back downtown. It would take at least an hour for me to make it back to her place. But I owed her that. She didn't deserve clap on my account. The awful part of the whole thing was that I couldn't remember whether I had balled the boy or not. I couldn't remember anything about last night. I shook my head angrily. It was like that when I had first come back from Vietnam. Times when I would lose a day or night. After a while, the blackouts stopped. Now I wondered if they were coming back. Chapter 3. A muggy, steamy smell rose from the streets as the heat baked the rain off the concrete. The streets were narrower as you came into East LA. The old houses leaned together as if to hold one another up. Now that the lights were out, the streets were almost totally dark. Even so, I was aware of life and movement within the shadows. It was something I sensed, yet did not see. Suddenly I found myself walking out in the middle of the street, my eyes searching the darkness. It was almost as if I had returned to Nam. I felt as if I were going crazy. This is Los Angeles, I told myself, walking down a street in the city, not up a jungle path. I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, but I knew it was there and spun to one side. In the dark, a loaded sock whistled by my head. When I straightened up, he was standing there, a silly grin on his cream-colored face. The sock hung limply from one hand. The other hand held the inevitable bottle of orange juice. "I'm going to hit you, Whitey," he said. His eyes were out of focus, and he was weaving slightly to some music that only he could hear. "I'm going to hit you, Whitey," he repeated, still smiling that inane smile. stared at him, trying to penetrate his heroin fog. "You do, and I'll kill you," I said quietly. Somewhere in his head, the music had come to a stop. He no longer weaved. His eyes struggled into focus. He sounded puzzled. "Anthony, you?" Just then, a car turned the corner, and in the approaching headlights, I could see him clearly for the first time. He was just a kid, 17, maybe 18. A straggly mustache and beard tried vainly to cover the pimples that were still on his face. Slowly, we separated, moving backward toward opposite sides of the street as the car passed between us. By the time the car went by, he had disappeared back into the shadows from which he had come. I searched the street, but saw nothing. Still, I didn't move until the radar in my head told me he was really gone. Then I went back into the middle of the street and kept on walking. "You're getting old and stupid, Gareth," I told myself. "You have no right feeling sorry for a junkie. That loaded sock could have broken your skull." But I did feel sorry for him. If you'd never known the sweet surcease for pain the needle could give you, you might feel differently. But if you knew, all you could feel was sorrow at the waste. And I saw more men in Vietnam wasted by the needle than by bullets. It was 3:30 by the time I leaned on her doorbell. After a moment, her voice came tinny and frightened through the brass speaker. "Who is it?" "Gareth, can I come up?" "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I have to talk to you." The buzzer sounded, and I pushed the door open and went up the stairs. She was in her doorway waiting for me. I followed her into the apartment, and she locked the door behind us. "I'm sorry if I woke you." "It's okay. I couldn't sleep anyway." I heard the sound of the television set coming from the bedroom. I reached into my pocket, took out the $10 bill, and held it out to her. "I didn't need it," I said. "You didn't have to come back for that. Take it. I'll feel better." She took it. "Would you like a cup of coffee?" She took one for herself and sat down opposite me. Her eyes were questioning. I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and strong. I met her eyes. "I may have picked up a dose and given it to you," I said. She was silent for a moment, but when she spoke, her voice was uncomplaining. "Why did you not say something before?" "I didn't know." "How did you find out?" "Lonergan. He told me I'd better get a shot of penicillin. You too." She sipped at her coffee. "Do you have a cigarette?" I asked. She nodded, took a pack from the drawer, and pushed it toward me. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'll go now if you want." "No," she said. "I'm not angry. Most men I know would have said nothing. I'll go to the doctor tomorrow. I'll give you the money for the shot as soon as I can. It will cost nothing. My doctor works at the clinic." She was silent again for a moment. "Is that all Lonergan wanted to see you about? He has no job for you?" "No job. He wants me to buy a newspaper." "A newspaper? Buy one? He must be crazy." "He is, but that's not the point. What does he expect you to use for money?" "My GI loan. He said he could get one for me." "And what does he get out of it?" she asked suspiciously. "The advertising. That goes through his company." "I don't know what kind of newspaper you can buy like that." "The Hollywood Express." "That one?" she said in a strange voice. "You know something about it?" I asked. "Tell me." "We have these tax delinquent employers, companies that do not pay the withholding taxes. The Express owes about $30,000 with interest. If you buy it, you could become liable for it." "Do you think Lonergan knows that?" "He knows everything else," she said flatly. I nodded. It was much too obvious for him to miss. I wondered what he had in mind. It made no sense for him to stick me into that kind of jam. "Did you say you would do it?" "I told him I would think about it. I'm supposed to look it over tomorrow morning." She reached for a cigarette. "I would like to go with you." "Why? What could you do?" "Nothing, maybe, but I few, if any, jobs for Chicana accountants. I would be grateful if you would come." She smiled. "Okay, what time?" "The collector's going to pick me up in the morning. I'll go on home now and let you get some sleep." "It's after 4. You stay here. I'll drive you over in the morning." "But What about your office? It's Saturday. She reached for the coffee cups and put them in the sink. The office is closed. The collector's red Jag was already in front of my house when we pulled up at 10 o'clock in the morning. I walked over to his car and stuck my head in the window. "Don't you ever sleep?" I asked. He grinned. "Not on Lonergan's time." He glanced in the rearview mirror at Verita's car. "How'd the chick take the bad news?" "She's not bad." "I figured that when I saw her drive you over to the clinic in Cedars. You got your shots?" I nodded. "I don't get it. Lonergan has to have more important things for you to do than to follow me around." "I just do what I'm told." He pulled a cigarette and stuck it in his mouth. "Ready to go?" "I just want to go upstairs and change. Then we'll be right with you." "We?" I nodded my head toward Verita, who was walking toward us. "She's coming along." "What for? Lonergan said nothing about her." "She's my accountant. Even Lonergan knows that nobody buys a business unless their accountants go over the books." For the first time, he wasn't as sure of himself. "I don't know." I pointed to the telephone under his dash. "Call him and check it out. I'm going upstairs. If it's okay, toot your horn and I'll come down. If not, just forget it." Verita and I went into the building as he was picking up the phone. She followed me up the flight of stairs and into the apartment. I opened the door and stared in astonishment. The apartment had never looked like this. It had been cleaned so thoroughly that even the windows and the crummy furniture shone. And when I went into the bedroom, I found that my clothes had been pressed, all my shirts washed and neatly ironed. "You're quite the housekeeper," she said. I wouldn't have guessed. Before I could answer, the boy came out of the bathroom. He was nude except for an apron around his middle. In one hand he held a bottle of Clorox, in the other a cleaning brush. He stared at us. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Gareth," I said. "I live here." His face broke into a sudden smile. "Oh, Gareth, I love you," he said. "I want to cook and clean and wash and press for you. I want to be your slave." Just then I heard the horn blast from the Jaguar outside in the street. I looked from one to the other. There was a hint of laughter in Verita's voice. "I think you'd better send him down to the clinic and get him a shot, but not until after he finishes in the bathroom." Chapter 4. The offices of the Hollywood Express were located in a dingy store on Santa Monica Boulevard, about a block from the Goldwyn Studios. The collector pulled his car to a stop in front of the store in a no-parking zone. With a fine disregard for the rules of the road, he managed also to take up half the bus stop. The windows of the store were painted over with dirty white paint so that you could not see inside, and smeared black lettering spelled out the newspaper's name. The collector opened the door and walked in. Along the walls of the store were 8 or 9 empty desks. At the back of the room was a large wallboard filled with papers pinned up with red, yellow, and blue tacks. "Anybody here?" the collector called out. There was the sound of a door creaking from a back room, and a tired-looking middle-aged man came out, drying his hands on a paper towel. He dropped it on the floor as he came toward us. "You were early," the collector said flatly. "Lonergan said..." The man's voice faded as the collector looked at him. The collector gestured toward me. "Gareth Brendan, Joe Persky." The man shook my hand unenthusiastically. Even his fingers felt tired. "Nice to meet you." I nodded. "This is Verita Velasquez, my accountant." He shook hands with her and then turned back to me. "Lonergan says you're interested in buying the paper. I'm glad he told you. I didn't hear about it until last night." Persky turned back to the collector. For the first time, a note of emotion came into his voice. "What the hell is Lonergan trying to pull? He told me he had a bona fide customer." The collector just looked at him. Persky turned back to me. "Are you interested or not?" "Maybe. That depends. I'd like to look over your operation before I make up my mind." "There's nothing to look over. It's all here." "You don't sound as if you want to sell. Maybe we'd better forget the whole thing." "You don't have any choice," the collector said. "Lonergan says he wants to sell." There was a moment's silence, then the anger seemed to seep out of the man. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "The usual things: circulation, sales, advertising revenue, costs. If you'll you'll show your books to Miss Velasquez, I'm sure we can find out everything we want to know. The man was sullen. We never kept any formal books. You must have records of some kind. How else would you know how you were doing? I operated mostly on a cash basis. Money came in, I paid it out, that's all. I turned to the collector. Does Lonergan know that? The collector shrugged. I should have known better than to ask. Of course Lonergan knew. I turned back to Persky. You must have some figures. You had to file tax returns. I don't have any copies. Somebody must have. Your accountant? I didn't use an accountant. I did everything myself. That included stuffing the paper into mailboxes. I'd had it. If Lonergan thought I was going to stick my neck into this mess, he was crazier than I was. I turned to the collector. Let's go. The collector moved so fast I hardly saw his hand. Suddenly Persky was thrown back against a desk. His hands clutched at his stomach and he was bent over and almost retching. The collector's voice was empty. You give the man the information he asks for. Persky's voice rasped in his throat. How do I know this guy and this name ain't some kind of revenue dicks? There's nothing in the law that says I got to incriminate myself. Fuckhead. Internal Revenue ain't going to get Lonergan's money back for him. Slowly, Persky straightened up. His face returned to its normal color. I don't keep the books here. They're in my apartment. We'll go over there and look at them then, I said. Where's your apartment? Upstairs, he said. Over the store. Verita spread the ledgers and a pile of forms across the kitchen table. He's going to take me some time to sort this out, she said. How long? I asked. Maybe the rest of the day. It's a mess. She turned to Persky. Do you have a 4-column pad? What you see is what I got. I'll run down to a stationery store and get one, she said. Persky looked at me after she had gone out. Would you like a beer? Thanks, he said. I followed him into the kitchen and he took 2 beers from the refrigerator. We drank from the cans. Ever run a paper? He asked. No. I let the beer run down my throat. It was cool, not cold. He saw the expression on my face. There's something wrong with the damn refrigerator. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you've never run a paper, what makes you interested in this one? I didn't say I was. It was Lonergan's idea. What makes him think you can do it? I don't know. Maybe because I used to write and worked on some magazines. It's not the same thing, he said. He looked at me shrewdly. Lonergan got you too. No, I'm straight with him. That was the truth. At the moment, I owed him nothing. He was silent for a moment. Be careful. Lonergan's got half the world by the balls now, and he's looking to get the other half. I didn't say anything. For the first time, an expression of interest came over his face. Right, you said. What kind of material? Articles, commentary, poetry, fiction. Try them all. Any good at it? Not very. I'd settle if I could be even a half-assed writer. But I know now I can't get enough words together to make a decent sentence. Once I thought I could. That's why I got in this paper. What did you do before? I asked. I was circulation manager for several papers like this around the state. They all did pretty good, and it seemed easy, so when I got the chance, I grabbed this one. He paused heavily. It wasn't easy. How'd you get in with Lonergan? How does anybody get involved with Lonergan? You're run a little short. Next thing you know, you're a lot short. You had a business. What about the banks? Zilch. I tapped out with them the first time around. What do you owe Lonergan? I don't the fuck know. How does anybody know with that crazy 6-for-5 bookkeeping mushrooming week after week? I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be $1 million by now. By the time Verita finished at 6 o'clock that evening, it turned out